I would like to call Budget and Appropriations Order at 5:30. Good evening, everyone. Welcome back to night 3 of 4. Feels like we haven't even left each other. Tonight we have MIS, the Treasurer, Planning and Land Use, Health, and then we will have Education wrapping up the night. So to start off on page 18 under Budget and Appropriations, we have MIS and Bill Lennox joining us tonight. So Bill, good evening.
Good evening. How are you?
Good to see you. Saw you briefly this afternoon in the halls.
Oh, yeah.
So the way this works is we'll just give you a chance to talk about your budget, anything you think the council should know, and then we'll open it up to questions if there are any. Before I turn it over to you, I once again want to just thank you for all the work that you and your office have done, especially over the last 15 months or so throughout the course of the pandemic, as the way technology is used has drastically changed across the city. Certainly appreciate all that you've done as the MIS director. But I'll turn it over to Jeremy first, as Jeremy is the Director of Budget and Administration and the Technical Department Head. And then any questions we can ask Jeremy and Bill.
Thank you, Chairman. So I just wanted to point out a couple of highlights that are different from last year. You'll see our salary jumped in a considerable amount, but our salary other dropped $16,000. So that's a reclassification of the MIS director's job duties from a 35-hour-a-week position to a 40-hour-a-week position. Something that has been before the council earlier this fiscal year, and that is now reflected in the 22 budget. So there's no longer two $8,000 stipends, but the responsibility of those stipends is now within the job description of the MIS director. So that's the big change up top. Through purchase of services, small increase. That funds a bunch of contractual things, services citywide on a MIS level that go up incrementally each year, so we can't level fund those. And then the big jump on the bottom on purchase of supplies, the $15,000 that wasn't funded last year, and then the $6,000 that was funded last year and not this. So that $6,000 just got moved up a line. So the replaced computers is now under new computers. Where it was historically. Last year, it jumped down a line from where it had been. So it's back in there at $6,000. And then we have a new Munis server that we need for next year at $9,800. So that's called out in the narrative. And then that's the difference in the 15.8. And I just want to echo your comments, Chairman, about the work that the MIS department has done specifically in supporting the increased remote work that we've had from a number of folks, whether it's setting up the laptops that we have, managing the VPN, all the Zoom, trials and tribulations that we had to start the year on the city side. MIS has definitely guided us through that. And this is we're about 6 months into having our third person in the department that is still getting, trained up and figuring out how we do things here, and is supporting public safety from an MIS perspective. So I want to thank the council for adding that to our 21 budget. That, of course, is fully funded in our 22 budget. And that's pretty much all the changes.
Yeah, Jeremy, thank you for that. I want to thank you for calling out to continue to study and determine how to best separate public safety from City Hall Network. I think that's something that, as a co-sponsor of that piece of business, as well as as a co-sponsor of the business for a tech survey. Again, want to say by no means is that any show of lack of faith in our MIS director, Bill Lennox, because I think we all know that probably the first car there in the morning and the last car at night, and usually late at night, it's Bill Lennox. We just want to ensure that Bill has all the tools that him and his department need to be successful. I think, Bill, you and your team deserve a lot of credit for that replacement of the switch in March. I believe it was March. But I think it also illustrated and called out the need for a public safety network as well. So really glad to see you see that called out in this fiscal year's objectives. So Bill, is there anything that you'd like to add?
Jeremy covered most of it for me. But the public safety part of it, that's ongoing. I know I have a meeting with the two chiefs and a vendor next week to discuss the phone logistics. So we can, they presented me with a sow, and they left the phone part of it out. So that's back to the drawing board. And I need the two chiefs in on that. Yeah, it's been a busy year, getting everybody so they can work from home.
Yeah.
And having the new guy in is going to be a help for once he gets up to speed and how we handle things here at City Hall. Be able to send them over to public safety and help them with some of the issues they want taken care of. You have any questions for me?
Todd.
Thank you, Councilor Delizio. I just have one quick question about, we see sort of computer replacements show up sporadically and listed under different departments and stuff like that. I was wondering, is there any appetite to move towards more of a lease model for purchasing computers so that we have a sort of a consistent amount that we see on the budget year over year?
So we tried to do that a couple of years ago and it was shot down. The new administration would probably be a little more open to it, but I don't think we've really gotten into any big discussions about that.
Okay. If that was from a planning perspective for the budget, it's something that I would definitely be supportive of seeing moving forward. And we can maybe, Councilor Delizio, we could talk about adding that to the budget message.
Definitely
Yeah.
makes sense.
Perfect.
And just a follow up on that, Bill, can you kind of forecast over the next 2 to 3 years in terms of a computer replacement program? How many do you think that will be either deemed obsolete or that we'll need to replace?
The next 2 or 3 years?
Yeah.
I'd probably around, I'd say 50 to 100.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. So I think, Councilor Kovas, I agree. I think it's certainly something that we should look into. A lot of times there is a cost savings when it comes to leasing.
Perfect. Thank you.
Councilor Conti, did you have a question?
Yes, Bill, are all of the expenses with the new service covered under your capital improvement?
No.
So are they not here on this list, or are they hidden here somewhere?
So there's a Munis server that we're purchasing this year. That's in our budget.
Okay. What about the backup servers that you just bought?
Backup servers were part of the grant, the $151,000 that we get the grant for.
Yeah.
That's not in the budget. You wouldn't see that in the budget.
But you've got batteries on those, right, as backup?
We have battery backups. We have, yeah.
So they're expected to have.
I'm sorry.
You don't need to replace those every year?
No, that wouldn't be every year.
And have you had any discussion about, we'll get to that later. I don't want to get off the track here.
Yeah, and Richard, the batteries would be added in my budget as it wouldn't be in capital improvements.
Okay. The other thing that I had is that you've got a new person, but I don't see that you have an education line item in your budget. Is there an opportunity for MIS people to get continuing education online with courses?
That's not I don't have any answer for that.
You don't know.
So
Okay.
we have a number of staff development lines in a couple of departments. We have one here specific to the 770 that you see is related to our purchasing assistant and her MCPVO classes. So we have, I can look it up, I think it's something like $7,000 or $9,000 on a citywide staff development that should an opportunity arise. And it's a good question, Councilor Conti. So should something arise that would make sense for the new person to participate in, we would access the citywide staff development lines.
Yeah, and I think at this point, Richard, the David that we have in here, he comes in with a degree. I don't think sending him to school right now would be something I'd be looking for him to do. I think it's more getting him some hands-on experience here at City Hall and police and fire.
I got it.
Yeah, Deb, and then.
Can I just interject
follow up to that.
one thing about some of the available training that we have that Bill makes sure that we're aware of relative to Munis and stuff like that? A lot of those courses, Bill, unless it's very specific to the thing that you and I went to in Boston some years ago when they had a national training here.
Yep.
A lot of that is available through webinars and is available free of cost with our Munis subscription.
Yes.
So there is stuff like that that Bill makes sure that we're all made aware of throughout the city for training, not just within his department, but it's not really free because we pay a lot of money from Munis, but it is available.
Yeah, so I'd just like to expound a little bit on Councilor Conti's point, because Rick, you let him go pretty easy on that one. You usually keep going, right? So
I spent a lot of time with Bill this year doing the assessment of his department. And when I delivered that to the council decided that I had not covered the scope of work that they wanted. So I went to the mayor and I said to the mayor, the expectations and the scope of work is way beyond my capabilities. If you want to do an assessment, which would be physical and financial and strategic for the future, you got to get an outside firm to do it. So he's taken that under consideration. And so in this particular department, I'm backing off because I think I don't know.
yeah, so let me
You know?
just kind of what I know from my own experience and especially working with the state and anything about technology. If the last 15 months has taught me anything, is that technology changes, technology needs change, technology becomes obsolete. And I say this because, again, I want to make sure that Bill has the support and the tools that he needs. I think that, I understand that there's recertifications, there's certifications, there's different training. I think in the budget message, I want to put in there that we should be looking next year to add a line item for professional development because technology keeps changing.
So Jay, I agree with you completely. In the city of Taunton, my department of 5 people has a $6,000 education budget because it's very important that everybody stays on top, doesn't make any mistakes, and keeps current with what's changing. When it comes to capital improvement development time, I'm going to sit down with Bill and I'm going to make sure that there's a generator for that backup server put into the capital improvement plan. That doesn't need to be in this budget.
Correct.
But I just had the impression, and you know what, Jay, you see in your job where things are changing so fast, it's not like a 5-year cycle. It's not like a 3-year cycle. It's like you're going through a tremendous amount of changes. I see it as an assessor. I see what's going on with you. In the city, I see a much more stable environment where things don't evolve quite as fast as what you're experiencing. And
technology needs what technology needs.
Yeah. And Bill went through a tremendous paradigm shift this year, getting everybody to be able to work at home. And he met all those needs. And I compliment him for that. If anything, my feeling about this budget is the same way as I feel about the DPW budget and the police department budget, that there's a lot more room to put something in here to make a positive change. But I don't know what it is, Counselor. I just don't know what it is.
No, I agree. I think this is a challenging budget in that respect. And again, I just want to make sure that as technology changes, that we're giving Bill the opportunity in his department and to be able to make those changes and get any necessary training they need. Especially
with what is now occupying a majority of the news with the widespread ransomware.
Yep.
I mean, Bill is on top of that, and Bill has a program, to protect the city from that. But that is evolving even faster than technology.
100%.
So, that's scaring me. And it's outside of my field, Counselor. I don't, there's nothing in this budget that I want to cut. Nothing.
I'm with you. 100% with you. Yep. All right. Any other questions, Todd?
All right. One other quick comment, just to consider for next year, is the GIS costs and I know in talking to the assessor yesterday, she was mentioning that some of those services are used throughout the city, and I know they have 50,000 in software for the assessor's office and another 3,600 for GIS services. And I think if that is collectively used throughout the city, then there may be some value in, from a reporting perspective, moving that over to the MIS department and managing it there. But
Yeah.
that's more of just an accounting thing to consider.
So, yeah, Todd, we used to have that in the MIS department. And
I saw it, but it hasn't
Yeah.
been there since 2017 or whatever.
yeah, only because the assessor has more input, more control, more need than the MIS department does. So we deemed it better at being down in that department than up here.
Okay.
And again, that's something along the lines of shared services that, I think we need to move more towards. Rick,
So on the issue of GIS, I am familiar and comfortable with it, so I don't mind sharing my opinions about this. The GIS function should either fall under the assessing department or the city planning department. The city planning department function as the engineering, a GIS manager, a GIS function is an engineering function. So while the heaviest user is the assessing department, it would not be wrong to put the GIS manager into the city planning department, sitting next to all of the engineering for the cuts and splits and land development in the city. So Bill's role, I think, on that is very minimal. And I would love to see the city of Attleboro get a GIS manager equipped with the proper tools to do the job. That concludes my comments.
all right. Thank you very much. Well, as we are up against Jeremy.
I'll be quick on this. Deb and I have had conversations about specific to Councilor Conti's comment on a generator. So we're exploring coronavirus relief fund monies to be able to purchase a generator for that, in the aim of continuity of service while folks are working from home and increased telework capacity. If something happens in the building, we still want to be able to access our materials and our services not in the building. So we're exploring that, and hopefully we can do it quicker than the capital improvements plan would.
Excellent. All right. Well, Bill, thanks so much. And honestly, keep up the good work you and your department are doing. And, I'm sure we'll talk to you sooner than later.
Thank you.
All right. Have a good
All
night.
right. Yeah, we'll see you.
Thanks, Phil.
Thanks.
All right. Now we're going to move to treasurer on page 27 through 29 of your budget books. And Laura, good evening.
Good evening. How are you tonight?
Good. How are you?
I'm well, thank you.
Fantastic. So here's the way we're doing this, same as we have over the last several years. We're going to give you the opportunity to tell the council anything you feel we need to know regarding your budget. We'll open it to Deb for any comments, and then we'll open it to the council for any questions or concerns they have.
Great, thank you.
Okay.
This year, there's not anything really different with my budget from past years. I did level fund pretty much every line item as instructed. Of course, salaries change, med tax changes, and that's an ever changing number. The only other thing I can add is I added like $50 to my supply budget because I am receiving a new copier. So the cost of the toner is a little bit more. So I did put that in there.
It's going to break the bank, Deb, Laura. It's going to break the bank.
Right.
And speaking of bank, I would be remiss if I didn't recognize you for your astute study of the bank and the fees. And as you and I know, is both spending decades in the banking field, between the both of us, that sometimes fees can change, fee structures, fee schedules can change. I appreciate the prudence you demonstrated, and being able to try to mitigate that by switching banks and going to a local bank is never a bad thing either. So thank you.
Thank you, Jay. Appreciate it.
Floor is yours, Deb. Any questions, concerns?
So Laura already touched on the Medicare, which is going to likely need funding next year based on the 3% cost of living adjustment, if that goes through for everybody in the union. Obviously, as the salaries increase, the 1.45% requirement for med tax increases. We annually sort of assess that in the beginning of the third quarter. Laura does as an assessment in her office. My office does one separately, and then we meet and make sure we're both around the same amount. And that's how the council typically gets that request. The other one thing that Laura, I think it's important for you to touch upon is your professional service line, which
Yes.
in fiscal 20, you have a revised budget of 75,000, excuse me, fiscal 21, you have a revised budget of $75,000 because you went back to the council and asked for money because of tax titles and the legal stuff that you do there. So the opening request in this fiscal year's budget is $35,000. Again, I think it's highly likely that if the level of activity for tax titles and catching up on all of the old properties and everything that Laura's office is continually doing continues at the same pace, it is likely that additional funds will be there, needed there for legal. So I just wanted to make sure the council was made aware of that.
Yes, that is correct. I historically, year over year, come to the council and request additional funding for that line item based on the number of files I have, but not only the complexity of the files I have with Sedell and Sedell. Some cost more if there's any kind of environmental issue with the property, if it's a commercial property, if there's additional time that they need to spend in court on those files, obviously additional funds are needed. I've been trying to move a lot of the old files that have been sitting for a very long time to Sedell, and I try to keep the same amount of files. As ones drop off, I put new ones on, so that's a rolling number of files. Currently, we're down to about 159 files, which is a far cry from the 340 when I started with the city. Every year, I'll have a tax taking and that number will increase, but we work those files very quickly to try to catch them while the number of dollars that are owed by the taxpayer are much less. They're more likely to get on a payment plan and be able to pay it. Some of these older files, people have passed away. Like the landfill is in tax title. There's a lot of different things that are in tax title that we're trying to move out. We're currently working on roads. There was a period of time where roads were assessed. We're currently working on moving some of those along. I've been working with Deb and Julie and Zeit around that. And we're just taking one project at a time and trying to move things along.
Yeah, I think that's important that the council and everybody else knows, Laura, that you've been able to clean up a lot of the old files. So that's some of the expense, as you explained, but on a go forward basis, it's realistic to assume that at the level of activity that they have and how much they're doing to clean that up, there will likely be a request for more money.
Yeah, and that's something that I'm putting in the budget message that I'd suggest to my committee goes in the budget message is we underfund that every year. I think we need to be a little more on point with that, and I understand the ramifications. But Laura, can you, year to date, how much have you brought in from tax takings?
Oh boy, I didn't actually look that up, but I can tell you
A ballpark's fine.
probably
look it
about anywhere between $600,000 and $700,000 would be my guess right now. And that's not all assistance from Sedell and Sedell.
Mhm.
A lot of that is just the efforts of our office, but a large portion of the more difficult files are being brought in by Sedell and Sedell. And some of these files have sat for just years and years and years, and they have to research background and people who've passed away and file multiple different petitions with the court. And it's a lengthy process. It can take up to 2 years to foreclose on a property. And that's when land court isn't closed due to COVID or whatever the situation might be. So, you know, we are still moving along. We are sending more files to them right now because we've had some drop off. So we're going to continue that.
Yeah. Well, I think that's an interesting point, right? So you had over 300, you're down to 179.
159.
159, my bad. Even better. You know, and we will have to probably fund 530101 later on in the fiscal year, but that's kind of something that pays for itself when you're talking about bringing in $650,000. So
Absolutely.
I think that's something that can't be overlooked.
Thank you.
Before we go into the debt portion, does anyone have any questions for Laura? Okay. And Deb, anything else that you want to add?
No, I think everything's been covered for Laura's department pretty nicely. Thank you, Ms. Treasurer. Where are you? Oh, you're not on my screen anymore. There you
Still
are.
here, I promise. Thank you,
All
Deb.
right. And Jeremy, you and Laura you gonna share the screen?
Yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen if that's all right with you all.
100%.
All right, can you all see the presentation?
Yes, sir.
All right, so thanks for taking a look into debt with us tonight. I'm glad Laura and Deb are here to talk through this with them, talk through this with me, with you. So I just want to kind of dive into a general overview. So I'm going to be talking about debt service for most of this. So this is 21 to 22 comparative. These numbers are in your budget book too, but this is a little bit easier to call them out like this. So debt service, I've broken down to schools non-excluded, excluded, and general government. This is just on the general fund. And then as a percentage of the budget. So we can see that excluded debt jumped up, which we'll cover in a little bit. But as far as non-excluded debt, we barely ticked up as a percentage of our general fund expenditures in terms of debt service. And that's kind of where we want to be. We don't want to get up too much higher, but the mayor has committed to slightly increasing our debt service load every year to be able to tackle our backlog of capital projects that we have. And feel free to interrupt me at any time should someone have a question. So I want to look at just our general government.
Jeremy, what?
Yep.
When in looking at through the DLS data bank, what is the debt as a percent of budget typical in the Commonwealth cities like Fall River, New Bedford, Taunton?
I don't know offhand, but as somebody else starts to drive, I'll go in and take a look for you. Let me just write a note.
And does that debt as a percentage of the budget include the high school?
So that's what I mean by excluded debt. So when the excluded debt is almost 4% of our budget debt service. I'm not talking about principal outstanding. I'm talking about current year debt service. So the total debt's just over 6%. The excluded debt makes up almost 4% of that, and then the non-excluded debt is 2.27%.
So our non-excluded debt has only expanded by 0.2%?
From last year to this, as a percentage of the budget, yes. But our budget also went up. So it expanded by more than 0.2% as a debt service number, but as a percentage of our budget, it only went up 0.2%.
Right. Got it. Thank you.
And so this is a number of our, this is our general fund, general government debt. So you can see we added a number of projects this year, which I'll get into on a different slide here. But things like Dodgeville Pond, library, DPW vehicles, police vehicles, and 2 separate fire vehicles on the general fund side. These are projects that had been ongoing, and we had, for some of them we had borrowed short, for some of them had just started this fiscal year. And we, just a few weeks ago, beginning of May, we had a recent sale. So you can see here that our principal stayed the same on a number of outstanding issues that we had, while our interest on those, as we have less principal outstanding, we have less interest. On the bottom half of the screen, you can see our interest payments went down, whereas we picked up new interest payments on our new issues. So our total debt service from last year to this year went up in this category of non-excluded general government debt, went up 1.62%, or about $40,000. And then you can see the very bottom there, the pay down ban, bond anticipation note, that's $645,000. So on the right there, those are the projects that we had short-term debt on, that we paid down in 21, and we no longer have that short-term debt in 22. So this is our new debt from the May issue. our total principal amounts here, and then what we pay in total debt service. The maturity is listed here in that we're talking about the economic useful life, and there are, if I'm not mistaken, there are state level statutes that define how long we can borrow against something. So you can see the fire engine and fire ambulance have different lengths, different maturity lengths under our allowable, under the governing statutes. We have different allowable economic life, and that kind of drives what our maximum maturity can be. Unsurprisingly, the improvements to the library have the longest economic life here, and we have that debt through fiscal year 2041.
That seems a little longer than I think anyone was anticipating.
A 20-year bond?
Yeah, I don't think that's, I just think when you look at it, it sticks out a little bit. I know it's common. I'm just saying when you're looking at it, it sticks out.
Yeah. So, yeah. I mean, that's a building improvement, roofing, windows, mechanical, HVAC, things inside of a public building, whereas the other stuff is, vehicles that we can't really bond for. We wouldn't want to. Yes.
I just might add, Jay, that might be a 20-year bond, but it's at a rate that is incredibly low.
I get that. I was just saying from the optics of it, when you're looking at 20, 24, 25, 26, 41, it sticks out. And if there are people watching at home, they're going to see that 41 sticks out.
May I just interject one thing as it relates to the principal that's coming on? The city received a premium of about $1.3 million, right, Laura, on the most recent issue, which obviously reduces, those go back to project costs. So they are restricted, but it also reduces the amount that your principal is showing here. So the comparison is it looks a little bit lower than I think people would have expected. Is that fair to characterize it in that fashion, Jeremy?
Yes, the 1.3 million in principal that we got also applies to some water and wastewater projects that were on this issue too. So as a, probably, I don't know, 300 or 400,000 of that 1.3 million principal can be attributable, or premium can be attributable to water and wastewater issues. But yes, that is a fair characterization. So here we have our school debt service from 21 to 22. What's, again, principal on the top, interest on the bottom. What's highlighted in blue is the debt exclusion. So you can see debt exclusion number 3. There was no principal in fiscal 21, but debt exclusion number 3 had an interest payment in fiscal 21 because of when in the calendar year we borrowed it. So that principal payment coming on in 22, and then 2 interest payments for debt exclusion number 3 in fiscal 22, as opposed to the 1 interest payment that we had in fiscal 21, drive our increases in debt on the school side. The Brennan Wamsutter roofs are the only new school debt on here. Everything else we are, paying down as the debt service schedule indicates, and as thus we're paying less interest every year. So here's just the excluded debt service, those blue lines lumped together, so you can see what principal and interest were for all 3 of those in 21 and 22. So that's the AHS issuance is driving our debt numbers, no matter what way you look at it. And while Laura was here, should you have any other questions on enterprise debt? We're going to jump into wastewater and water. Wastewater, you'll notice had a
before we move to enterprise, can we just see if anyone has any questions on what you've already discussed? I can't see everybody, so if you have a question, just jump in. All right, thanks, Jeremy. I just want to give people the opportunity.
Yeah, of course. So we could talk about this a little bit more when we get to the wastewater enterprise budget itself. But the fund had a great deal of debt roll off this year. So their debt service 22 to 21 is actually down 600 and some odd $1,000, which again, we'll get into, but helped us be able to balance the budget without a suggested rate increase. A lot of that was driven by debt payments. I have an asterisk here next to what's CT 26-2, that $292,000. So that's a contract 26, and we have MWPAT loan subsidies and betterment share of annual debt service that we'll see in the wastewater rate calculation that offsets that by something like $92,000. And then the new debt that came on here was the wastewater treatment facility upgrades. That project ended and we borrowed the balance that we needed there.
Jeremy, can I ask a question about APA?
Yes.
So is that just for new projects? And I know there's 135 pages of guidance, but is that just for new projects, or can that be used to pay down existing debt?
I'm not certain. What I am more certain of is our desire to spend it on new projects, stuff that we don't already have programmed and budgeted and borrowed for. And I don't believe we can use, as I'm talking, I don't believe we can use it for current debt that was incurred before the bill was passed on March, whatever it was, 10th, 2021. So it's either a no or a probably no, but our intent is to spend it on entirely new things.
Yep, no, it makes total sense. I just wanted to get the question out there. And it makes sense to spend it on new, especially now with how low rates are across the board.
Absolutely. And then we see a slightly different picture in water, where there wasn't nearly as much debt maturing. There wasn't a single project that did mature, unlike in wastewater. So we are progressing down our debt service schedule. So we did have interest payments that were reduced, but we had 3 new projects that we borrowed for here: Roy Ave, Steer Street, and Reed Ave. So those hit here, and the total debt service for water increased this year by almost 10%, or just over 10% at $229,000. And something that I included here because it's in the grouping, I'm going to go back one. I also included it in wastewater is the OPEB trust payment. So both water and wastewater contribute $50,000 to there. I know we had a long discussion on OPEB when Owen was here 2 nights ago. But water and wastewater contribute $50,000, and part of the rationale on upping the general fund to $100,000, besides the fact that it needs to be up even more, is that the general fund has a much bigger liability going forward than either the water or wastewater departments do, and we are contributing the same amount as the water and wastewater. So the general fund needs to, regardless of what the gross number is, the relative number should be much higher for an OPEB contribution on the general fund than the enterprise funds. And I will note here on both water and wastewater, the interest on temporary borrowing is slightly higher than it actually is going to be. It was a preliminary number before we had everything resized and final. So we'll have usually debt service is down to the penny. We'll have a few hundred dollars left over in the interest on temporary borrowing, both enterprise funds. And then here's just a large scale picture. We've been talking about debt service this whole time as it relates to our current year budget, but here is the total outstanding principal across funds. Again, I like to pull out the excluded debt just because that's treated so much different in terms of a budgetary and tax rate situation, and it's the largest project the city's ever done, and I think deserves to be called out there. So general government, schools not excluded, schools excluded, the 2 enterprise funds, and then we have some short-term debt outstanding as well. So that's the city's total outstanding principal right now. And then, while not quite related to Laura, but related to debt, is just some things that we've tried to do in this budget to, I know interest rates are low, but it's cheaper to pay nothing. Sometimes I get the useful life of projects, and you want, something that's going to be enjoyed for 30 years to be paid for by the people who enjoy it for 30 years, but we also want to do some pay-as-you-go capital funding. So we have $500,000 in the citywide reserve, and there are a number of projects that have been called out. Councilor Conti, the mayor, and I had a discussion on a number of projects. So some of those are represented here. A number of the projects that were initially considered were some HVAC projects, but to the extent that we can use ARPA funding to fund HVAC projects, we will utilize that. In addition to our water, wastewater, and broadband infrastructure investments, which we can get into the broadband infrastructure and qualified census tracts. We can get into that a little bit more with the library later. And then something that we touched upon last night with Chief Hagney was the $180,000 in police cruiser purchases that are also on the general fund. So rather than paying for that with debt and paying the interest on it for 3 years like we had been, we have that now in the general fund, and it is our intention to keep that there going forward. And I believe that's the last slide.
Great. Before I open it up for questions, Jeremy, the only question I would ask is, can we get this deck if it hasn't been sent out already?
Yeah, certainly.
Thank you. Councilor Corbis.
Just a couple questions about the debt, and if we could hop back to the high school bonds and all of that again. If I remember correctly, 2021 or fiscal year 2022 was when we were expecting to see the peak of the principal payments or the payments for the school bonds. Are we, for the residents, is it accurate to say that we're sort of at the peak of those of what taxpayers will be paying towards the new high school?
I believe we don't have another large borrowing planned. We have more of a cleanup at the end planned. Mm-hmm. Laura, is my understanding that we are at or near the peak in this fiscal year? Is that your recollection as well?
That's correct. That's correct. So there'll be a cleanup once the final audit is done, and then we'll know what that final number is, but it will be nowhere near the amount that I had to borrow for fiscal 22 to hit the budget, put it that way. This is the height of it, yes.
So I think I do think that's useful information to communicate to the public that, I mean, we've seen some pretty steep increases recently, but this is sort of the max for that, and that's useful. Also, if I remember correctly, we were doing level principal bonds for the high school for 30 years.
That's correct.
Is that where we ended up? And that's what we did for this last set of borrowing?
That's correct.
So that would push us out to 2047.
So
total,
if we're looking at that, remember now we borrowed in stages. So mm-hmm. The first one would be 2048, which was the 12 million. The second one is 28 million, would bring us to 2049. And the third one, which was 76,340,000 is in 2051.
2051. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And I know I just refinanced my home mortgage last year. For some of those early bonds, like is there such a thing as sort of refinancing that to a lower rate, or is that not a thing that happens with municipal bonds?
So it used to be a thing that happened with municipal bonds, and then the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act that was passed by the federal government disallowed us from doing advanced refundings. So now municipalities can only do current refundings, which is refunding maturities within 90 days. If we did an advanced refunding for anything longer than 90 days, it would be a taxable bond, not a tax-exempt bond for the bondholders, which means they would demand a higher interest rate. No, not really.
Okay, fair enough. So they're very different than personal mortgages.
It used to be not that different, and then during the last presidential administration, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act changed that for us.
Perfect. All right. That's all I had.
Could I jump in, Jay, with a follow-up question?
You may, yes.
Thank you very much. Jeremy, does that change in the last administration? Is that going to change what we're going to end up paying in the long run?
No, it just changes our ability to go out and change. It takes away our ability to change what we are paying in the long run. So when we enter into a contract, a bond, we are under that contract until maturity in 2051 for the last of them here, and whatever the maturity is on the cleanup note. No, it just changes our ability to refund. It doesn't change anything about our current holdings.
Thank you.
Can I ask a question, Jay?
You may.
Laura, I don't have it in front of me, and I don't know if you do because we're doing this from our respective homes. You got a really good interest rate though on the last huge issue, the $80 million issue. I mean, you had a premium of almost 3.7 million. It was 3,668,000, I believe, on that issue alone. What was the rate?
Deb, boy, that's a question. Around 2, perhaps. I didn't put it in the debt Bible, which is something I'm going to add to the debt Bible. I think would be useful for everybody to know what that rate is. But I would say it's somewhere less than 2%.
Yeah,
Well, if you average it out, you know, it's a coupon, but it's the TIC rate that we're talking about, the true interest cost. I think it was somewhere in the 1.7 range. And I can actually answer that question and send it out if everybody wants to know.
I just think that, to your point, Councilor Kovas, I mean, the treasurer was able to get a really great rate. I think everybody may recall that the original plan was for us to do a smaller amount in the spring of 2020 that we didn't do because the market had turned. It was right at COVID. There was no market. You couldn't even go out on the street to sell. So we waited, and because we waited and we ended up doing the note in the fall, we revisited the amount with our financial advisor, the mayor, Jeremy, Laura, and I got together, and it ended up being way more beneficial to do the larger note in the fall. At that time, we even captured stuff that we potentially were going to wait further out. I mean, we definitely.
That's great. It's awesome.
Yeah, we got in at the right moment.
Perfect.
All right, Jeremy, Laura, thank you for this. If you could get the deck out, I think that's it's a lot of information to kind of absorb in a 15-minute presentation, but I think if questions arise, we can certainly shoot Jeremy a message.
Yeah, and all the debt service stuff, while synthesized here and kind of called out and shown on Excel, all of the current year debt numbers are in the budget book. It's just the kind of the summaries and the total debt number, the total principal that are in your book. But I will get that out shortly for you.
Yeah, thank you, Jeremy, because that deck spells it out nicely. So, all right, Laura, thank you so much. And it's always good to see you. All right, Todd, are you able to bring in Gary? Planning review on page 43 through 47 of the budget book. Gary, good evening. Gary, you're on mute. Gary's no longer on mute. Gary, good evening. How are you?
Councilor Deluzio, good evening, councilors.
Nice to see you again.
Same here, folks.
So as we discussed earlier, Gary, this is your opportunity to talk a little bit about your budget and anything that you think that the council should know. And again, it's on page 43.
Okay. So the 3 items in my salaries account, 511000 on the personnel services. The first is salary. Those, as you know, those are all bound by the classification plan for the city. This includes the salary of the Director of Planning and Development, the Senior Land Use Planner, the Environmental Planner / Conservation Agent, and the Planning Administrator. So that's under the salary account. Then I have an overtime account for $3,900. That is 100% purely for the time that the planning administrator spends at our evening meetings for both the planning board and the zoning board. So while she's the department's planning administrator during the day, at night she's the clerk for the planning board and the clerk for the zoning board of appeals. I projected the annual hours for fiscal year 22 at time and a half with her two separate salaries, one which is the COLA and one which is her step increase. And I projected that that's, I think it was about $3,874. So I just rounded it up to 3,900. I shared my math with Jeremy and it came up with the 3,900. And again, that's purely for 100% night meetings, for nothing else. And that's only for the zoning board clerk and the planning board clerk, who's the same person. The next item, longevity, $5,200. And again, that's strictly by the classification plan. So there's no subjectivity or discretion there. It is what it is. You go a little further down, you get to office supplies. I've requested $250. And if you go a little further down than that, for memberships, there's a request for $496. That would be for the annual membership for myself, for the National American Planners Association, and also for the Massachusetts chapter of the APA. So it's two non-salary items and the other three salary items, staff salary, overtime, and longevity.
All right. Yeah, it's $250 for an entire year of supplies, Gary. You should be ashamed. Should be ashamed.
Well, the mayor and the council.
Of course, my friend. Kidding.
Very much. It was much less than that. So
No, you're right.
it is what it is. Thank you. And we manage with it. So I appreciate it.
Yep, absolutely. Council Corbett, you had a question.
Well, first of all, was it 500% increase from your normal $50 worth of office supplies to $250 is I applaud you for always having a very lean budget, Gary. I know year after year it's incredibly lean. My one question is regarding new computers, and I haven't seen anything in there for a while, and I don't know if that's being tracked somewhere else or if the machines in your office are incredibly old. I would just encourage you to make sure that that we're sort of maintaining those and upgrading the machines within your office so that you guys can continue to be effective.
Sure. So while I don't request these on a year-by-year basis, and what do I mean by this? Planning and land use projects, appropriations, monies for, as you say, computers, equipment, so forth and so on. Like many of the smaller departments, we look to the MIS department. They maintain our machines for us. If we need upgrades, I can always, I always feel free to give Mr. Lennox a call if we need servicing, if we need an upgrade on something. So anything that we need in terms of hardware when it comes to computer, I think most offices, if not all of them, but at least for mine, we always go through MIS, and they're very, very accommodating, whether or not we have defunct machines or machines kind of on their last leg. Sometimes it's just a matter of rebooting and recalibrating, getting us modern software, whatever the case might be. So the reason why I never really approached the municipal council is I've always gone through the MIS department. I have spoken with the mayor this past year that I will be looking for some considerable funds, and we're trying to get some quotes to convert departmental documents, blueprints, files, reports that we get, whether it's for the planning board, zoning board, or conservation commission, all these files, to get those all digitized and get them computerized. So that would probably be a request coming down the pipe, to the municipal council. But what I do, as you know, is we pursue our projects through grants. And when we identify a project, we identify a grant source or grant sources, And when the occasion arises that we need a cash match, we come to the city council. That's been my MO for decades, rather than coming to the council and asking for an appropriation to pay for a project. That's why I don't ask for line items for discretionary funds for professional services. We try to seek out the grants, and once we secure those, we do come to the council, through the mayor, of course, for a matching appropriation. In those instances when I haven't been able to secure a grant, or a grant more often than not is not available for a project, then I do come down to the city council, which I recently did, for example, for the hydrological study, feasibility study for the Mechanic Street pond, dam, and dike. There's just no funding source for that. So occasionally I do come from the council, but rather than asking for that upfront, in July for something I might be doing in February, we just leave it that I just come down to the council and ask for the funds at the time I need them. So for that reasoning, I don't ask for that stuff up front. I request it as I need it as we go along.
That all makes sense. And the one other thing I wanted to mention, and I think I've brought it up in past years, is the zoning maps that are publicly available are fairly outdated and could use a refresh. And I didn't see anything for that for this year. Is that something that's still on your radar?
We're actually in the process of doing that. So I had a conversation with Bill Lennox, again, our MIS director, and our maps now are actually updated through the assessor's office. So I've been speaking with our assessor, and we actually have a meeting with our GIS consultant next week. And we think that we can update these maps through her normal map maintenance account. So we will be updating the zoning map. We will be updating the city street map. Once we update the city street map, then all the other maps that feed off that, for example, the school district map for middle schools, the school district map for the elementary schools, the ward and precinct maps that could get superimposed on those. So the two most important base maps right now are the zoning map and the street map. And we're actually kicking that project off next week. And hopefully we'll have those done probably within about a month thereafter.
That's incredible news.
Coming for your question.
Outstanding, Gary. Thank you so much. That concludes my questions.
All right, thank you, Councilor Corbus. And Gary, I think it's interesting that you bring up the funds about digitizing the records. I think, I know that's something that Steve Withers has talked about and his predecessor talked about. And I think maybe it's something that we could look at citywide, because there's certainly a lot of records that we don't want to lose. So,
well, if you know, the building commissioner's office did that several years ago. I know the city clerk's office has pursued that. I've watched and learned, and the time certainly has come for the planning department for a variety of reasons. First, it's going to be a massive space saver.
yeah.
Less reliance on a filing cabinet system. It just consumes massive amounts of space in my department upstairs, also down in the vault. Secondly, or should I say primarily just for the preservation of the documents themselves, I think it's a better system. Third, for the public, it's quicker access to those. They're digitized, we can get those out quicker rather than having to make photocopies. It's cumbersome. So there are a variety of reasons. I know it could be a significant upfront cost, but maybe we could break it out in phases, because I think it's going to be time consuming. I don't think we're going to jump into it all at once. But even if we spread it out over maybe 2 to 3 years, within that 2 to 3 year period, we can be completely computerized, and I just think a lot more efficient and create time that we could spend on something else rather than going through the hard search for documents and through file cabinets. I know it sounds kind of silly, but given what we do with the planning board, zoning board, and conservation commission, you can only imagine the number of inquiries we get during the course of a day to pull off files and plans, whether it was something for last year, 2 months ago, or even 10 years ago. They're still very relevant. But, we manage to try to get those out as quickly as we can, but, there's always room for improvement to be quicker.
Yeah, modernize it, if you can automate it, bring a little more efficiency, nothing wrong with it.
Plus, we can integrate with other departments as well.
Absolutely. All right. Yeah, Councilor Conti, last question as we're right up against the clock.
Just one question, Gary. You said that all of your projects, you just go to the council and ask it. For example, you want a new comprehensive plan, you're going to hire an engineering company. You come to the council, you ask for 6 figures, and we give it to you. And that over the course of the year, that might happen. I don't know, 2, 3, 4, 5 times. It strips us of seeing a true budget for your department, because basically what you're reporting is just you have a bunch of people who sit around and do a lot of thinking and you pay them. and that's that's not a stretched truth of what's actually going on in the planning department. But we don't have a real picture of how much we spend in planning over the course of a year. So Deb, that must be a different way to pull that all together rather than this department budget sheet.
Well, first of all, I don't think I do come before the council and ask for 6-figure projects for projects that don't search for grants. I do put those actually in my what do you want to call it, the summary project. I listed out the projects for the council to know what we're hopeful that we're going to address this coming fiscal year. I think the request for the recent $23,000 came up only because we were going to acquire that real estate on Mechanics Pond, and I thought it was critical that we have a study to go with that. So I would have never known that that would surface a year ago. So as it surfaced and we made a recommendation and came to the conclusion that we're going to accept that real estate as a donation, I thought it would be prudent that we also have a hydrological study to go along with that. But I think the big ticket items, when I do come to the council, you're triggered knowing that I might be coming down for a cash match because the mayor sends that information out to the council as an FYI that we're going to be applying for a grant. For example, when we did the Dodgeville Pond dam wall a few years ago, you know, if we do from a large land acquisition through, say, the land grant, that's all sent out ahead of time. So sometimes we just don't know at the beginning of the fiscal year, depending on how revenues are going, whether or not the mayor's going to pull the trigger on a particular project. So while you might go back and see over the course of years, the funding that I've requested is probably pretty lean. I think we do most of that work in-house. Like when we do ordinance revisions, we do that in-house. We don't go out. When we do the capital improvements plan, we do that all in-house. When we do the open space plan, if you recall, I think I only requested a $5,000 appropriation, and the Conservation Commission picked up $5,000. So one thing that I'm very proud of my staff is, given our expertise and academic background, a lot of what other communities might farm out, we do that all in-house. So I respectfully disagree. I don't think we really do come to the municipal council 4 or 5 times a year or more and ask for funding. And, you know, what we do most of the time, if not all the time, is because of a cash match for a project, because if they don't accept in-house services, which we really try to see if we can do with in-house service, in-house services, they sometimes just want a match. And so I'm compelled to come to the city council.
Yeah, and Gary, I would add to that. I think that the way the question was phrased wasn't necessarily the right way to phrase the question, because I would think that the chair of the capital improvements program would know that so much of what Gary does is dictated by state and federal mandates, some funded, some unfunded. So, Gary, all right, I'll toss it to Deb to wrap it up so we can stay on track.
I know you're tight on time, and I don't want to take up a lot of time because I know the health department and the solid waste is next before the school. To Councilor County's point, the Gary's office, like many offices, do a lot of projects that are not displayed in the budget because they're in special revenue funds or capital project funds, which is a requirement that they're there. So on a go forward basis, if next year, as we do the budget, you want a list of all those other funds that are not part of the budget, but that each department actively is managing, it would give the council a better idea of all of the other stuff that the departments do that don't display here. So, you know, there's a lot, in addition to the special capital project funds like Dodgeville or some of the other grants, larger grants that Gary does, they also have special revenue funds like the Notice of Intent, the planning and review funds. They have the Wetlands Protection Act funds. They have the Community Development Block Grant is managed in that department, which is a whole division of the planning department that we don't touch on because it's fully funded by federal funds, but it has a full-time employee, and there's, hundreds of thousands of dollars that manage through that fund that the public and the council don't get to see. So it looks like it's a really small budget, and but there's a lot of money management and fiscal management that happens in that department in addition to what you see. So I think maybe that was part of what you were trying to get to, Councilor County, that there's all sorts of other stuff that Gary's office does, as do all of the departments. I mean, Bill was here earlier. They had a $151,000 technology grant. You don't get to see that in the budget. So certainly we can make sure between Jeremy's office and my office that you're provided with the list of those things. I think you are made aware of them, and you are all familiar with that because you see the financial statements, you see other reports that come out of my office, but I don't know that the public necessarily understands that, or that every other department in the city understands the level to which some of our colleagues have other responsibilities not showing in the budget book. So we can address that next year.
Mr. Chairman, what are your thoughts on that?
Council Conti, I'm sorry if I misunderstood your question, sir.
No, I wasn't clear, Gary. It wasn't your fault. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to hear what your thoughts are on what Deb just said.
I think Deb's 100% right on what she just said. I think that this is going to go down a rabbit hole we don't want to go down right now.
I agree.
What we'll do is we'll thank Gary for his time, and Richard, as always, I do appreciate where the questions come from. So we do thank you for that. Gary, have a great night. Thanks for taking the time to spend with us tonight.
Okay, folks. Good night. Thank you.
Talk to you soon. All right, and we are going to move on to the Health Department, page 78 to 81. And Jessica Squared, nice to see you both.
Hello. Thank you very much for having us. We're excited to be here to discuss our budgets.
Well, we're happy to have you. And first of all, before we get going, really want to thank the Health Department for the Herculean work over the course of the last 15 months, especially throughout the pandemic. You and your entire department certainly were the unsung heroes. And, special shout out, of course, to Nurse O'Brien, who's just been fantastic. So really, really great work. You have a very, very grateful city behind you.
Well, thank you very much. And Jackie is amazing. She's not with us tonight, but we couldn't do it without her. Dr. Quinn, our health officer, should be logging in any moment, but I think we can probably go ahead and get started. If you would like us.
Let me just tell you the way we do this. We'll give you the opportunity to talk about your budget, anything you think we need to know, and then we'll toss it to Deb for anything that she wants to add, and then we'll open it up to the council for questions.
Perfect. Thank you. So starting with our health department budget, it pretty much has remained the same from last year. There are no major increases in it. Actually, both of our salary and longevity lines have gone down significantly, with two senior staff members retiring and both me and the deputy health agent being new. We've seen some cost savings in those lines. But also under our salary line, we were able to add our outreach worker transitioning from part-time to full-time. That'll be hitting our budget effective January 1st. Up until this point, they've been funded through CARES Act. We've only been paying a portion of that split through our salary line. So that's the changes that you see in the salary lines. The only other major increase to our departmental budget was for the certifications. We went up $1,000 on that, and that's due again to both myself and the deputy health agent being new. The deputy health agent does have some new certifications that she needs to go to for soil school and whatnot, and those classes are a little bit more costly. Vehicle maintenance has remained the same. Our office supplies have remained the same, and our medical supplies lines have remained the same for the health department. And that's pretty much the health side.
Okay. Deb, any thoughts, anything you want to add?
So I think the non-solid waste program in the health department is pretty straightforward. The only piece that's not trash related, rubbish related, that the council did vote on June 1st, the health immunization revolving fund that was renewed, fund 2611 for $10,000. So that vote has already happened. And then there's a number of grants that this department is managing as it relates to MAHB and COVID and that type of stuff. So you can't say enough about what the department has done over the course of the last year as it relates to the pandemic. So I don't really need to expound on that. Everybody knows that. And you covered that earlier, Mr. Chairman. And I think we really need to talk about the solid waste program because it's a big program. There's a lot of numbers and things to discuss. So I don't know if you want Jessica to start with that or.
Yes. Yep. Makes perfect sense.
Yeah, our health department budget's very straightforward. So if you want to transition into the solid waste budget, I'm sure you all have the sheet that was provided to you. We're seeing an increase this year of $16.94 to the rate. Majority of that is attributed to the services that are provided directly to the city. I know the chart was also sent over to you earlier. The citywide services, we're seeing an increase from 1.5 million to 1.7 million over the course of this year. So that's a significant amount of that fee that we're seeing the increase for. The remainder of the $3.88, a majority of that is attributed to tonnage. You'll see the changes in our contamination rates that we've been budgeting for. And I know the municipal council's probably heard of that in the news lately. There's been some talk as to what those audits have been looking like. And then we also provided the additional budgeting for prevailing wage and the additional household units that were not included in last year's budget. We've encumbered those over this year as part of the contract as well. A majority of our services we've been able to stay pretty conservative with, trying to reduce in lines that we've had the ability to reduce in and really spending some of the time that I've been here to look forward to, how do we further reduce those numbers going forward, trying to keep this budget as reasonable as possible. We changed some services this year. If you're aware, we opened paint and oil waste days up to every Saturday versus one Saturday a month. And what this is allowing us to do is decrease additional weekend overtime shifts. We're not seeing those large surges on every first Saturday of the month where we need to have 8 to 10 overtime shifts. We're spreading them out over every Saturday, and we're able to reduce those overtime shifts and open up services to residents a little bit more. Next year, we're also hoping to go forward with a mobile household hazardous waste day that will eliminate some additional labor costs in our budget and make it a little bit more user friendly to the residents as well. So those are things that we've been looking at to kind of, reduce the costs and keep it as manageable as possible for the residents as well.
Sorry, I was on mute. Does everyone have there's Exhibit B? We also have the fiscal 21 solid waste budget. Does everyone have those forms? I believe Deb sent them out to the council this afternoon. Okay. Deb, anything you want to discuss before we open it up for questions?
So just a couple of points of what happened this year that I think is relevant for everybody to have a little bit of a background on and things that are going forward. So the city did receive the $300,000 that grant from DEP for the carts, the solid waste trash carts that were implemented at the beginning of the fiscal year. So those carts, the amount that's being raised in the rate for fiscal 22 on your spreadsheet is less than the annual apportionment because we've basically divvied that up over the next few years. The other thing that the health department had to do this year was they had to do a very large grinding event because grinding didn't happen in fiscal 2020 because of COVID. So that took a substantial amount of the resources that they had available and the flexibility away from them in their existing revolving fund. They also had to cover, as Jessica shared with you earlier, costs that were not anticipated properly when the contract last year was going to be implemented. So there is a clause in the contract about prevailing wage. The prevailing wage rates that were used at the time, and there, there's an escalation clause in there. If at the time that the contract was actually awarded, one set of prevailing wage sheets were used. Of course, we all know that prevailing wage sheets change, so that does account for a substantial portion of the increase in that cost. So if you look at your budgets, and you can see, Jessica already alluded to the increased cost under the Exhibit B, which is the collections of $1.7 million. Going forward for this year, it's $1,710,000. That, on the chart that you received, Exhibit B, that cost was $1.5 million in fiscal 21. So there's the increase of 210,000 right there. Go across your chart. Next year, it's going to be 1.9 million, 56,000. In 2024, it's 2,312,000. So I know that this discussion is about this year's budget, but you all need to be aware that the department is actively looking at all of the options that they have in order to try to save costs and move money around in order to meet the obligations in a year that things changed. Other things that change that have become apparent because of both the new contract and fresh sets of eyes looking on things. Historically, inside the rate and the way the contract was previously written, tonnage was just picked up throughout the district, and tonnage was paid for by the schools. But tonnage would also be picked up at city sites. The city is responsible for picking that up. That's no longer on the rate. So that's important. Anything that we can identify that is not a program cost to the ratepayer is pulled out. So it's not included in the rate. That happened. The shredding event was an annual event that the health department put on. It's really not a cost of the solid waste program. So that will be picked up by the levy from the city's perspective. It's not a huge cost, but it is a cost that this program shouldn't be paying. So as things are recognized and we move forward, other things that have happened in discussions with Jessica, Jeremy, and I are things like we need to build into the cost replacement of vehicles. They have some vehicles within the department that are fine used for this, or there will be an approach to the administration, but the ratepayer is going to continue to see increased costs. We all know that Attleboro has one of the best trash programs around. Unfortunately, historically, we also had one of the best fee structures around. We're going to be paying a little bit more money on a go-forward basis. And I just don't want everybody to have sticker shock next year or the year after and say, did we not know this? It's in the Exhibit B, and it's available here for you all to see. So it's a lot. I mean, it is a lot, but we've spent more time going over this budget and the revolving fund budget than any other revolving fund budget this year. The health department constantly is looking at things and, trying to figure out ways to curb costs and save costs. It's just the reality is that trash removal is an expensive industry, and waste management contract, it's going to be expensive going forward. That just happens to be the biggest piece of the program. It's not the only piece of the program. We have a grinding contract. We have a white metals contract. We have a sharps contract. They do an awful lot in the department.
And I think one of the struggles we endured this year too is a lot of, the waste and what's associated with COVID and what's associated with, year one of the contract. And it's really been a balance and act to try and properly, forecast what those numbers look like and what's attributed to what portion of it.
Something else that came up in the fall, and maybe Jessica Santos or Jessica Horsman can speak to it. When the carts went out, we found more homes, right? I mean, so
correct
that there were all sorts of things that happened in fiscal 21 that we were able to identify internal control issues or deficiencies and tighten them up. Some of them were just, it didn't matter, quote unquote, because we never paid a separate bill for certain things. Now that we're able to pay a separate bill, we can identify where it goes, and we're making sure that those things are happening correctly.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you look at this, and Deb, thank you for bringing up and talking about fiscal 22 through 25. And when you see really where it ends up after the 5th year or at the 5th year, it's concerning. And, you know, I think the one thing that keeps going through my head right now is how can we provide relief to the ratepayer at some point? You know, I mean, it's a big bill to flip. You know, what we hear most about is speeding, sidewalks, and the blue bins. And, you know, I think that the blue bins, we were told they were bigger than what they were previous. And I think that from a gallon perspective, that might be true. I think it's just the design of them. So the question there is, I'm not asking about replacing all of them because I understand that's unrealistic. But when we have to replace them, has there been any discussion or any thought to get different shaped blue bins that would have the same gallon capacity? This is something that we hear constantly. We've been hearing for the last year, so be remiss if we didn't raise this.
That was my question as well, Councilor Delicio. So,
And I'm not going to lie, that's been one of the things that I've heard since day one of starting has been about the shape of the bin. And I think that's definitely, you know, something we can discuss with waste management going forward, you know, with the design plan, if that's something that we even have the capability of. I know the size goes back to the breakdown as to our grants and what we're allowed to have, you know, but we can definitely research when it comes to replacement if there is something that can be done. Not sure under this contract if it can, but it's definitely worth something researching.
Yeah, that would be my caution, that is in the present agreement
Contract.
Those $300,000 of the cost of those bins, as I understand it, are being picked up directly from DEP because of and DEP limits the size of those, right? Is that correct? My understanding is that they're 35-gallon bins, and that's dictated by other people. Jessica?
Correct. That's dictated by our RDP grant.
It is. Yeah. So, and the cost of those. I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Deb.
And the cost of those inside the contract at $111,600 per year. You know, I don't foresee a way to get out of them in the near term.
Sure. Yeah, we've got to ask the question, and
No, I appreciate that. I just don't want to give you false hope.
No, and you know, there is no hope if we don't ask the question. You know,
this is true.
So it's like Michael Scott when he took credit.
Containers that fall over all the time. It probably is not part of the contract, I would assume. But I understand all that and understand that there might not be anything we can do right now. My only other question is with regard to the contract. I know the initial contract was signed back in February of last year. Has anything changed in that contract? Is there a new contract or anything that was signed? I know we added what do the mayor call them, the alibi amnesty weeks. Has there been a new contract signed? And if there was, I haven't seen it, so just was wondering if that had changed.
No, there's been no contracts changed.
Okay.
Signed.
The amnesty program was a separate contract or an amendment to the contract. I'd have to look to see which one it is, but the contract that was negotiated for that term, that 5-year term, is the contract that is in place. That there's been no changes to the contract that you would have received last year. A copy of. I can certainly email that to you again.
I have that one. I was just
wondering
if anything had changed before we sign off on the budget, because the budget, when we approve the budget, those contracts are pending appropriation, correct?
Correct. There's a clause right in the contract on page. The pages of the contract are not numbered, but item number 4 is payment is subject to annual appropriation, as are all contracts in the city. They're subject to appropriation.
Excuse me, could I jump in for 1 second? Dr. Quinn's texting me. I think he's stuck in the public waiting room.
That's my fault.
This-
Got it.
Oh,
I've got it.
okay. Thank you.
Sorry.
That's okay.
Good evening, Dr. Quinn. Welcome.
Sorry about that, Dr. Quinn. That was my fault. I didn't notice you.
Hi, Jay. Thank you very much. How do I get on the picture? It's just me.
There you go. Mhm.
Sorry about that. I've been listening for the last 10, 15 minutes. Sorry. Just trying to link in.
No worries.
Okay.
Again, apologies. That was my fault.
Oh, no. No worries. I've been proud of you. I just didn't want to, be watching from afar.
No, we appreciate that. Todd, any other questions or concerns?
Nothing else for me. I do think it's important, especially for Councilor DeSimone that might be new, to recognize that contracts are pending appropriation, and by us signing off on the budget, we're also sort of signing off on these contracts.
Correct. Councilor Conti.
Regarding the waste contract, that's water over the dam. We're stuck with it until 2025. You're just gonna have to buck up and put up with it and make sure that it goes out for a competitive bid in 2026. I have a lot of questions, Mr. Chairman, so I'm not gonna ask them tonight publicly. I'm gonna pick up the phone and talk to Deb tomorrow and deal with them. If there's something that I think that comes out of those questions and conversations that should be in the budget message, I'll send you an email.
Well, what questions while we have the subject matter experts here?
Well, the grinding, she mentioned that there was a grinding contract. That's new. In my recollection, it wasn't a grinding contract. And what was the grinding cost that came out of the revolving account last year?
So I can comment. We go out to state bid for grinding. We saw excessive grinding costs this year because a lot of the grinding was not completed with all the issues that were going on with COVID for the previous year. But we're also hoping this year, with all the changes that were made with the landscaping tickets and then going out to bid a little bit more frequently on the grinding every few months, we have a plan in place that we're pretty confident will help to lower those grinding costs going forward.
That doesn't answer my question. I asked how much was spent.
Oh, I'm sorry.
126,000.
126,000. And a brand new machine, 239?
No, $126,839.
I wasn't aware that we could get a state contract. The last time I had a long conversation with the health department, there was no one that was interested in bidding on the grinding. And that was at the time when we were thinking about buying a machine for $250,000 to do the grinding in-house. And I'm
This
not going to belabor
includes
that point.
taking it away, right, Jessica?
Correct.
Yeah. So part of the issue of that, as I understand it, is the pile there and how much space we actually have. So they've been behind. They had substantial grinding that was done in fiscal 21.
And Jessica, is any of that product being sold?
No, it's not.
Jessica, we're going to have a long conversation, you and I, coming up after the budget hearing. I wrote a plan for that field, and I think the whole thing needs to be looked at from 10,000 feet. What does it belong in the health department? But that's a conversation I'll start with the mayor.
That's probably the best place to start with it, because
Yep.
I think it might be a little bit outside of our purview.
Yep, I agree.
All right, any other questions for our friends in the health department? All right, seeing none, again, a lot to look over. I think if there's any follow-up questions, I'll certainly get them to you all, but thank you for taking the time. The one thing that I certainly agree with Councilor Conti with is the contract's a contract. And, what we need to do over the next really 3 years is figure out how we can work to provide relief to the ratepayer, if we can. So we appreciate all the work that you do, especially again. Yep, Chris, yep, Dr. Quinn.
Just want to recognize Deb. Thank you so much for helping Jess and Jess with these
It's been
numbers
huge.
and
Thank
driving
you.
down into these numbers, Deb. Appreciate it.
Oh, no problem. Jeremy's been a big help too. The four of us have met more on this than anything else. And
Yes.
yeah. And you know what, Jessica Horseman is new and really come on board and doing a good job, but I can't underestimate the efforts of Jessica Santos. I mean,
Yep.
she really does a lot and answers all the questions that I also have myself. I think in addition to the contract, in addition to the pandemic, it's been a difficult year in trying to gauge how much tonnage really there is. People were home. Hopefully people are returning to offices and stuff. So it's been a tough year, but thank you, Dr. Quinn. I appreciate that. We're happy to help.
I think we all share those sentiments, Deb. But Jessica Squared and Dr. Quinn, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank
All right.
you.
Have a nice
Have a
night.
good one.
You too.
All right, so what I would say with the, before we move on to the education piece of the budget, there's a lot to go over, you know, not just for the newer counselors, even for those of us who've been doing this for a while. Take a really good, close look at it. Questions you have. Kathleen, I want to recognize you for sending questions through Virginia to Deb. I think, you know, you come from a very astute vantage point, and some of the questions can help us when we're forging the budget message. So,
Thank you, Jay.
okay.
And thank you, Deb.
100%. Thank you, Deb.
You're
All right.
welcome. And we'll have more of those answers for you tomorrow.
Perfect. Thank you, Deb. All right. So to bring us home, we have Mark Furtado and we have Bill Lawson joining us. Of course, Bill is from the school department, with the school committee, and he is the finance chair. And Mark Furtado, we're all familiar with Mark. He is the business director for the schools. So Mark and Bill, the way we've been doing this is we are letting the departments talk about their budget and anything you think that the council needs to know, and then we'll toss it to Deb for anything that we might have for her input, and then we'll open it up for questions. So Mark and Bill, the floor is yours. Welcome.
Thank you.
You're on mute, Mark.
I thought he sounded brilliant.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sorry about that. I want to apologize for the superintendent not being here. A community forum that he's attending and could not reschedule. I also want to thank the city, and particularly, you know, Deb and Jeremy and the mayor for their efforts on our behalf. I'm sure you've heard stories all night about the horrific circumstances over the last 18 to 20 months, and we're grateful to have found a solution to, you know, achieving a service budget in the context of some of the creativity the state employed to you know, to minimize educational funding. So if you'd like me to, you know, use decimal points, I can get the documents to do that. But essentially, our level service budget is $84 million request. The city is going to be funding it at $82 million. That gap is going to be addressed by using funds at a little over $1 million, and what our end of year position is at the end of this year. And we feel fairly confident that we'll be close to our level service budget and we'll be able to operate in that manner. I want to make the committee aware that our foundation funding is driven by enrollment at the school. Our enrollment number for October 2021 was 200 students than what's been going on for the last 25 years. You know, our enrollment has been incredibly stable over a very long period of time. Those 200 students were represented by 100 kindergarten students who were essentially redshirting because of the pandemic conditions, and then 100 students throughout the rest of the district, very possibly for the very same reason, but not concentrated as it was with kindergarten students. So those two had, yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. You keep coming in and out. We're losing you a couple of times. I don't know if maybe move close. Yeah.
Let me try a relocation project.
Okay. Getting you ready for 2022.
Yeah. Let me know if this works better.
So far, so good.
So the loss of 200 students, 100 kindergarten students, and 100 throughout the rest of the district in terms of our October enrollment resulted in a reduction in funding in our foundation budget of $2.5 million. And as I opened up with the gap between where we're being funded and the necessity for ESSER and essentially carryover money is $2 million. So had we been funded at our normal enrollment levels by the state in this for 22, we would have been fine. But that did not happen. The state was aware of what they were doing when they were using the kind of depressed numbers, and we ended up where we ended up. So again, I'm very, very grateful for the city for its very hard work. You know, again, in these circumstances, this is a terrible undertaking. And, you know, we're very satisfied with where we're going to be heading into the new year.
Mark, can I ask you a quick question about that? I'm sorry. I think it's an important point that, you know, the funding is definitely based on the enrollment numbers. The enrollment numbers were lower this year because of COVID. What happens in the next school year if the funding increases? I'm sorry, if the enrollment increases because now those students are back in school, will there be any sort of supplemental funding that comes through the state?
No, they haven't indicated anything like that. And, you know, we're concerned. You know, obviously we can't force families to send their students to school. You know, depending on what kind of bounce back we get, you know, obviously our operating funds, the non-grant funds, the non-carryover funds are already going to be 2 million short going into 23, in addition to what our contractual obligations are going to be. So we're concerned. We're keeping our eyes out on registrations, which unfortunately, you know, it's sort of a sport in Attleboro where we're going to have people in lines around the building in August. So we won't know anything until, you know, after school starts in terms of where we're going to be. But no, there's going to be no effort by the state to gap that they created. That the number that people throw around is $300 million. The state knowingly underfunded school finance by $300 million by using depressed numbers across the state of Massachusetts. And I think we were one of, I think the number was 25 school districts out of the 350 or whatever it is, that were, you know, profoundly hit by that.
And historically, there's been concern, I'll say, with how the Chapter 70 formula works to begin with. So that being said, now thrown this loop, it's certainly providing an uphill challenge.
Yeah. Sadly, and again, this is just a scuttlebutt through the state funding process. Like I said, they knowingly used depressed enrollment numbers across the Commonwealth. So they are going to face a real situation for 23 if enrollments bounce back, because they're going to have to fund those students that they didn't fund this year, plus fund their new obligations to the SOA. So a lot of people thought they would use the prior year enrollment numbers just to make sure that they didn't have to climb a huge mountain in 23, but they didn't do that either. So.
Okay, thank you for that. Sorry to interrupt.
No, it's I think the second thing you said was highlights. We don't have a lot of things to highlight. You know, we're going to continue. I think it's important to know we're going to continue with a remote program, but it's a fraction of what we did this past school year. We found that there are students kind of with medical reasons where they really thrived in that environment. So we're going to make sure that environment is continue to be offered for our families. Fortunately, that is also able to be funded through our COVID grants. So we're funding that enterprise that way, not through the operating budget. And we'll have funds to do so through FY '24.
Yeah, hopefully we'll see some relief in somewhere in those 135 pages of guidance from the American Recovery.
Yeah.
Jeremy, I don't know if you're waving at my comment or if you have a comment.
Yes.
Jeremy, and then Deb. Jeremy was raising his hand.
Yeah, that's what happens when you leave your seat, Deb. So yeah, I definitely thank you, Mark, for that. The state's going to get whacked in 23 if there isn't some sort of stabilization when those students come back and we have new students, and they have to fund the second year of 6 instead of 7 of the Student Opportunity Act because they didn't fund year 1 of the Student Opportunity Act in fiscal 21. The recent numbers on state tax revenue collections kind of give us a good amount of hope for what state revenue is going to look like, and whether it's supplemental appropriations or them replenishing their rainy day fund to be able to get back to kind of normal appropriations for 23. I would waste my time speculating, but it's we're concerned with 23. I'm also concerned with 23 in that right now we're using 1.179 million in one-time federal revenues to support the ongoing budget of the school department. I never want to be in the place of using one-time revenues for recurring expenditures, but the way I viewed this and the way we viewed it administratively is it's a one-time revenue in ESSER, but it's also a sort of a one-time expense in that it's a lack of funding that we only think we're going to see for this year. Some other highlights I wanted to point out that this budget is 2.5 million over net school spending, and then the 1.179 million in ESSER money. And the 2.5 million over net school spending includes a $300,000 contribution to special education stabilization, like the mayor highlighted when we talked on Monday. Mark and I and Deb have talked recently too about using ARPA money for revenue replacement. So there's some sort of there's a formula about how your revenue prior to the pandemic and then any drop in revenue would be considered attributable. So we're going to look at the schools holistically, look at the schools as a school lunch program, look at, we think we have some opportunities to use ARPA funds and essentially use them in a nearly unrestricted manner as school and educational purposes as the bill allows us to. And then just touching on one thing, not quite budget, but definitely school related. We're about 54 weeks away from having the new high school turned over to the school to occupy the high school. So those of you who have been part of the process, who have watched the building go up, who have gone on tours, who have watched the SBC, which just concluded, where we pay a few $1 million in bills every month, we're just about a year away from the school department being able to occupy the building, which is quite a feat for the team and quite an accomplishment for the city.
Thanks, Jeremy. Deb.
So I want to make sure everybody in the council clearly understands what the plan is for the school and what the commitment of the administration is. And I just want to touch base on a couple of things that we, as a group, had talked about when I was invited to a previous budget discussion, because it involved the school and some of the things that are moving targets within the school. So as everybody knows, the city has received COVID Relief Trust Fund money. We will be receiving and have received our first tranche of opera money. The schools have received ESSER funds, and ESSER funds are to come as well. But our approach throughout the last year, certainly through COVID and everything else, is to maximize the use of federal dollars to the best of our ability, wherever those gaps need to be filled. So while the ESSER funds are being used, as Mark alluded to earlier, to fill the gap for next year, the 1.179 million, as part of the level funding budget that the school has asked for. Some of the things that are going to happen are allowable expenses that are allowed to be paid for that would be in the first quarter of fiscal 22 are going to be filled now with available funds at the school. The school department will have a surplus, or we're projecting a surplus specifically in transportation more than anything else. Those dollars are not available for the prepay that the school can use. So the administration has committed to, and Jeremy will, I'm sure, reinforce this with everybody so that they get it from the administration's representative instead of the council's, that at the end, after the books are all closed and all the figures are done, I will basically be reporting to the administration how much money of the fiscal 21 budget the school has turned back in its entirety, whether it's net school spending or non-net school spending. And the administration's commitment is to appropriate those funds back to the school in the fall to finish that gap if there is one or isn't one. But that commitment was made by the administration when I was going through the budget and making sure that we're all on the same page. That's the school department's understanding. That's my understanding. What we can't tell you today is what that number actually is, because everything's moving. And when I say everything's moving, things are moving. We talked earlier in the year about school lunch program and how the school was going to pick that up. The school is going to pick that up this year, but ARPA funds are going to make us potentially available to give that money back to the school. So those numbers are fluid. I hate to say it. I really like to know exactly what's going to happen, but every time we are able to maximize the use of available federal funds to the benefit of any department, whether that's on the city side of government or the school, we're doing that. The city is going to, ESSER funds that aren't available to the school, that there's some identified needs that the school, they've reached out to us, we've reached out to them. We're going to be paying for some things that the school needs in the near term as well. So while it's not, ideal for us to say, we're going to have to come back to you as a municipal council, hoping that you support the administration's plan wholeheartedly and make that appropriation in the fall. It is the plan. And it is something that we believe will work, and I will be able to get you those numbers after I close the books. So I just want to make sure that everyone understands there's a supplemental appropriation that will need to be made in order to actually bring this whole thing to closure.
Yeah, Deb, I think that makes sense, and that's easily something I could get behind, and I would think the council would be able to get behind. I think it's money that was already budgeted to the schools that wasn't used for whatever reason. Maybe it was givebacks, maybe it was whatever the case might be. But I think.
But what will happen, Jay, is that will actually close out to free cash.
Correct. But
so I don't want people to not understand that. I need to make sure folks understand that now.
Yep. But I think that just from the policy standpoint itself, I think it makes sense. It's the right thing to do.
Okay.
The one thing that we've heard time and time again throughout COVID is we're all in this together. And I think this is really an opportunity where we can show that. Jeremy.
Yeah, thank you for that explanation, Deb. That is exactly what we plan to do. That is exactly, that was our intent. And then Deb told us how we do it machination-wise, because we had the grand idea and didn't quite have the mechanics of it down. So thank you for that, Deb. Yes, so anything that was originally appropriated to schools that they didn't spend and gets turned back to us, we will come exactly back to you. Chairman, you said it great. We're all in this together. We're all pulling on the same oar. We understand the difficult situation that the school is in through kind of state level actions rather than anything that the school department did. They presented an entirely responsible and reasonable budget, and we still weren't able to make the numbers work because of our Chapter 70 funding. So yeah, anything that gets turned back, fall to free cash and come back through to do a supplemental appropriation in the fall.
Yep. Committee, that's a lot. It's a lot we just went over. Questions or thoughts? Councilor Corbis.
And just sort of looking back, big picture, and I think it's been covered, but I'd also like to applaud the administration. This year, I think it's roughly 41 million for the state and the city's contribution. Last year, it was 43 million and 39 million from the city. So like, and then the year before it was 40 and 38. So like the city's gone from 38 million to 39 million to 41 million. It's quite a big jump this year to sort of compensate for the decrease on the state side, and I appreciate that the city's been able to do that, and to be able to increase net school spending year over year. So I know it's obviously not what the schools would want overall, but I do appreciate that they've been able to sort of make those ends meet. So
Jeremy, did you have your hand raised?
Yeah, I didn't want to cut off any counselor if there's another question, but yes. So thank you, Counselor Kobus. A lot of this is due to, I think, relationship between the school side and the municipal side, clear communication, pulling on the same oar. And the mayor and I have said it a number of times that the school department successes are the city's successes. And so we want to be on the same team here. And I think we are. And I think I am too proud of the 2.5 million over net school spending this year. And I want to see how we can, continue to support the schools going forward.
Councilor Concha, anything you want to add? Were you raising your hand or stretching? I'm sorry.
I was scratching the back of my head, but I do have something to say. I've spent a lot of time in Bill Larson's finance committee last year and the year before to try to get an understanding of the school budget. And it's more complex than the city side budget. And watching over the course of a year, going to that finance meeting every month or nearly every month for over a year and a half, I got to see the challenges that Mark faces. Mark Furtado is, without a question, in my mind, the most appropriate person for that position. He's an absolute master of that budget. And Deb said that there was a lot of things that are moving, and he's dealing with that every year. That is almost a function of a whole section of his budget. And every year he pulls it all together. It's amazing. I'm behind this mayor and his desire to give the school funding a plus net school funding, because it's been neglected for way, way, way too long in this city. We're talking 20 years of neglection. So 28 years of neglection. So to see the city finally bucking up and increasing their funding on an annual basis doesn't disturb me a bit. It's catch up. And I just agree with everything that Jeremy just said. We're pulling on the oar together. And Mr. Chairman, I don't know what you're going to put in the budget message about school spending, but I like what we're doing. And I'll end with that.
Thank you, Mr. Conti.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Councilor.
Any other thoughts, questions, or concerns? Mr. Waterman. Ty, shut the camera off.
I'm all set now. I lost the picture. Got it all. So Mark, I want to thank the school for what you did to get us through the year. And I'm particularly impressed by the development of the virtual academy. And I'm wondering if the state is going to honor the virtual academy fully financially. And is there anything you want to add to that and what you're doing this year with the virtual academy?
Sure. So a couple things. We had to formally apply the virtual academy to the state as an independent school, and we've done that. We did get an initial response that directed us to kind of sharpen a few of our points, which we are in the process of doing, and we'll resubmit. But we have every expectation that the virtual school will be accepted by the state. So, excuse me. We went through, we went from 0 to 600 last year with, our top enrollment in the virtual school in the past 20 months was like 1,300 students. So we had a heavy burden to meet on the fly over the past, 18, 20 months. So what we're going to offer in September is going to be a much more robust program. We're assigning a principal to it. It's going to be a pretty neat thing. And again, we did that because we found a population within that 1,300 students who attended this year who really thrive and need that environment. So rather than having them go homeschool where we get no financial credit for that, or transfer to a private school, we believe strongly this is going to be a retention program as well. And because of that, again, additional funding from the state. So it's going to be a permanent fixture. There is going to be a portion of our student body that needs it, and it'll prevent us from losing students who historically we have lost.
Kudos to that. Thank you.
Any other questions, thoughts, or concerns? Do you have anything you want to add?
No, I'm good. Like I said, I'm just very appreciative. I know Dave is very appreciative for everything the city did in the past 20 months to support us and get us through what was a very difficult time. So we're very grateful.
All right. Well, as we wrap up, Bill, to you and the rest of our colleagues on the school committee, you guys had a really challenging year. You had some decisions that Sophie's choice. No one was going to win those decisions. Can't please all the people all the time, but I feel that the school committee conducted themselves with professionalism and in a manner which really put the needs of the education of the students first. So a really nice job to you and your colleagues.
Appreciate your comments. We tend to get a lot of the input from the community on both sides, as you say. But I think sometimes what the community doesn't realize is the school district has a truly amazing administrative staff, principals, teachers. They're the ones that they do the day-to-day work. They're the ones in the trenches, really making all this happen. And, I can't even start to thank them enough for what they've all done, since this all started back in the last, a year ago in the middle of last March. We all are in this together. You're absolutely right. The city has done a fantastic job of supporting us. And everybody in the schools have done a great job supporting the students to the best that we can. So really appreciate all of your help and your assistance.
We're all in this together. I think that's the underlying theme here. And, really, you gotta feel bad for, the fifth graders, the eighth graders, the seniors, especially last year and this year, who really lost so many rites of passage, but really setting them up well for future success in education and work when they go on. You talk to some of those kids and they're just still so happy, and especially watching the senior parade 2 weeks ago was just so much fun to see the kids being able to be out there and cheered on by friends and family and strangers. It was really pretty cool to see. Selfishly, Mark, as a father of a freshman this year, I saw firsthand and I know I'm not the only parent on the council, but I'll speak about my experiences. And I think what the teachers had to endure, what the administration had to endure, really across the APS, it was amazing. And it wasn't exactly the freshman year that I'd planned for my son, but looking back, I don't know I'd have it any other way at this point right now. He's learned a lot about himself, as I'm sure every other student has. So congratulations on a challenging but successful school year this year and last year.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, is there anything else from the committee or the council? All right. Bill, Mark, thank you very much. I'm sure we'll be seeing much more of each other as the weeks go on. And if there's anything you need from us, certainly let us know.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and all your fellow council.
Yes, thank you.
Talk soon. All right. So that brings us really just about to the end of the meeting. Tomorrow night at 5:30, we have the Council on Aging, then the library, then Park and Forestry. Deb Derek's going to talk about the zoo, I'm presuming.
Yes, the zoo, yeah, yep.
All right. I think that's probably going to be a big bulk of it. Then we have veterans, wastewater, and then water. And that will be the department head hearings. Monday night, we have a meeting, again at 5:30. This is where we're going to read in what we can from the budget. Vote out any motions that we have, so we can vote on Tuesday night. We have public hearings on water, wastewater, and solid waste Tuesday night. And then I believe I got to find out exactly what the rest of the scheduled meetings are. Deb, you have a perplexed look upon your face.
I'm sorry, sir. I did not have you on my calendar for Monday.
No, it was just the committee.
Oh, okay.
Hey, feel free to come down, Deb. I'm sure that's exactly what you want to do on a summer night, on a Monday night, after spending 4 nights in a row with us.
Well, if you need me on Monday, it would be my pleasure to attend.
He says that trepidatiously.
All right, so I have until Monday to get most of the questions answered from the city council that have been sent. Okay.
Awesome.
No later than that.
Yeah. I thought you were going to say you have till Monday to schedule a golf game.
No, that's Tuesday, sir. All right.
You have something?
But I think just as a follow-up, some of the questions that have been sent to me, I have responded to earlier today, and my staff is working on some of the other questions that Councilor DeSimone had forwarded. Councilor Conti, I believe we answered your question as to the percentage. So I think we're keeping up with some of the questions. Okay, great, thank you. The legal spreadsheets went out earlier today for information on that.
Yes, got it. But at some point I want to touch base and just talk with you. I don't know if you're better by phone or in person.
Either way, tomorrow's schedule is pretty tight. And then I have meetings on Friday morning, but a lot of time on Friday.
Okay, all right, maybe we'll shoot for Friday afternoon. Thank you, Deb.
Okay. And if there's something else that anybody needs that they think I can help with, don't hesitate to ask.
Excellent.
I would like to say one thing about tonight's presentation on debt. I think that Jeremy, you and Laura did a really nice job on that. And I think it's nice to have that laid out as a budget presentation as part of the budget. So I appreciate that.
+1 to that.
Yeah.
Jeremy, did you have something you looked like you were trying to talk at one point? And then I'll get to you, Rick.
Yeah, I wanted to quickly follow up on 2 things from before. One, the high school debt that we sold in October of 2020, the $80 million premium amount, or par amount, we had a $3.66 million premium on that. And our true interest cost on that debt was 2.3712. And then earlier, somebody had come up with, or we were talking with planning and development about all the different funds and all the different activities and the money that flows through that office that is not represented in the general fund. I'm not going to commit to an all funds budget, but I want to commit to future budget years to having a more holistic approach of what departments do. So things like revolving funds across departments, you hear Deb say, and you vote on what the cap of the revolving fund is, but I think you would benefit from a little bit more insight into what those revolving funds are and what those revolving funds do. We have a number of grants. I don't know that they all elevate to the level of needing a budget presentation on them, but I think for some of the larger ones or some of the more regular ones, specifically CDBG and some things on Council on Aging, I think the council would benefit from that. If I had another 0.4 FTE in my office, we could have done that this year, but we'll try to do it. I'm going to try to get something to you for the fiscal 23 budget that has a more holistic approach.
I appreciate that, and we'll continue to work on regular meetings that are scheduled out for the year, for quarterly, for updates.
Definitely.
So we'll work on that as well. Councilor Conti.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, through you to Jeremy. Jeremy, would you please email me that PowerPoint presentation? There's a lot of things there I did not understand. I didn't want to interrupt the timetable tonight, but I would like some time to look at it and maybe have a conversation with you so that I could better understand it. My email address is rick@councilorconti.org. It's you went through it so quick and so thoroughly, and I appreciate that. Thank you very much. But you lost me.
And you will be sending that to the entire council as well, you said earlier, correct?
Yeah, I sent it to Virginia and copied both you and President Cooper and asked her to distribute it to everybody.
Very good, thank you. Councilor DeSimone.
Councilor Delizio, I don't know if this is slightly off topic, but I'm concerned about the $1 million increase in the rubbish pickup program. That I didn't see that one coming, and I'm wondering. And I know it's a contract. I respect contract, but I just feel like, how can we go about planning, preparing, and perhaps mitigating what could very well be at least $100 increase over the course of the next 5 years to the ratepayers. I want to be prepared. I don't know if that's and all due respect to the admin, we need a task force. We need to get ahead of this with some ideas to mitigate, either bring in revenue, because I'm with Council Conti. I feel like we're underutilizing the compost center. Can we sell stuff? Can we take in landscaping compost? We've got to be a little more innovative here. The residents, there's going to be a revolution. There's going to be a riot. So just food for thought.
Yeah, no, that was my comment when I said we need to find a way to build in and provide relief. Because when you look at what it jumps by year 5.
How do we do that, Counselor? How do we do that? How do we plan?
Yeah, and that's something that we're going to have to try to figure out the best we can. I think that this was part of what the discussion was this time last year.
Okay.
And even at the end of the last fiscal year. This one. Jeremy, did you have something you wanted to add? And then I'll go to Council Conti.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Councilor DeSimone, you said $1 million increase in the rubbish program this year. I just want to.
Well, between now and 2025, it's a little over $1 million, right? Between FY21 and FY25, it goes from 1.5 to 2.6.
Yeah. So, okay. I thought you meant $1 million increase in the program this year. So yeah, that's $1 million in just the collection costs over 5 years. Just next year, going from 1.7 to 1.91 with our current amount of households, that's a $14.60 per household increase in the rate, not accounting for prevailing wage, fuel, labor costs, any of that. So I share your concerns, but I just want to make sure everybody understands that the entire cost of the rubbish program is borne by the ratepayers on the program. There isn't a general tax revenue that supports this. So any revenue raised to offset expenses within the program have to come from users of the program.
Okay, thank you.
Good definition there, Jeremy. Good explanation. Thank you. Council Conti.
So through the chair, Councilor DeSimone, I have a meeting with the mayor on this Friday at 2:00, and that compost center is the #1 topic on my agenda. I cannot invite you to that meeting, but I would encourage you to set up a meeting with the mayor to do the same thing. And I think it has to come from the mayor's office. This task force you mentioned might be a good idea, but that rubbish contract, we didn't like it when we got the contract before we got the budget. We didn't like it when we got the budget. We don't like it now. We're not going to like it for the next 3 years, 4 years. And it's not going to happen again the way it happened in the past. That's a guarantee. The potential for mitigation, the problems that that's going to create in the city is huge, and I agree with you on that. And I believe that there are ways that we can come up with some solutions to ease those issues as they arise. But we need to put some brain power behind it, and we need to put a dedicated effort into it, and it won't happen unless it comes out of the mayor's office. That concludes my comments.
Yeah, I think we all share the concerns. We've aired the concerns last year throughout the course of this year. There's a lot we just didn't know or like about the contract, but at the end of the day, the contract is a contract, and, you know, we've got to figure out, there's got to be some way we can provide relief, because, you know, tax increases with the school on top of what your taxes go up every year, water rate increases, you know, there's a lot for the homeowner. There's a lot for the resident who buys into pays into the solid waste program. It is a lot, but I think at least we're getting the conversation started. And, you know, oftentimes just getting the conversation started will spur some action. But, you know, I agree with Rick. I think, you know, let's continue to ask the questions of the mayor, continue to ask Jessica Horseman for what she thinks, and, you know, represent the people we represent. That's really all we can do at this point, my friends. All right. Kathleen, Ty, thank you for your participation the last several nights. Certainly appreciate it. And Rick and Todd, thank you for everything as well. I think I've already thanked Jeremy and Deb about 800 times, but, you know, let's make it 801. You know, I think this process, 2 years in a row on Zoom, could have been a real challenge, but we found a way to make it work. We're not there. We're about halfway there, but, you know, we'll wrap these up tomorrow. We'll vote what we can out of committee on Monday, and we'll be ready to go with plenty of time to spare in case something comes up. So that being said, I would call for an adjournment at 7:41.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
You're adjourned at 7:41. Thanks for great discussions tonight. Have a great night.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone. See
Thank
ya.
you, Jay.
See you tomorrow.
Thanks, Deb. Thanks,
Thank you.
Jeremy.
Bye, everyone.